Right now, Syria using chemical weapons on its own people. That was 9 days ago. At least the best analysis of American British intelligence says so. Now, we're going to get you the latest on what we know now and what we think will or could or should come next. And speaking of next, all eyes on the president as he decides what the U.S. response will be. Will he go it alone, and will our allies help? And there you see on the screen here the man who would be mayor potentially for Democrats, Bill de Blasio. He, a surprising frontrunner with all the latest polls. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. A lot to get to this evening, but we're throwing the format a little bit out the window tonight, this Friday evening, the 30th of August. We're going to bring you up to date on the very latest that's happening in the Middle East, the unfolding situation. You'll hear from the president, you'll hear from the Secretary of State, all in very clear and strong language saying that Syria crossed a bright red line and there will be consequences. We believe as we come to you this evening, it is not if, but when the U.S. will take military action. But they will largely do it alone. Few nations, including our strongest ally, will stand with us, and we'll show you poll numbers that show the American public skeptical at best if this is the right move, and growing concern in Congress saying that they should have a louder voice than the one that they've been given to this point. So what we've decided tonight, Andrew, Dominic, and myself, is to bring you into our conversation, and you, the public, not only say what our next move ought to be as it relates to Syria, who should get a sign-off on this, and what the strikes, if we do them, should look like and be limited to, but also we ask you at home, going forward, what should American policy be in the world here? When is it our fight going forward? Toll-free phone lines are open, and tonight we give you an equal voice. 38766-2428. We're going to ask how we should get involved if, as a nation, we should need in Syria, and we ask you at home to get involved in our conversation. So you can get involved online and on the phone lines. We're doing a return back to a former format where we gave you a much more prominent voice, and tonight we will do that. The phone lines open as we speak right now. Again, that toll-free number, 38766-2428. And again, we'll get to that reaction shortly. And when I talk about getting involved as a nation, we're talking about everything from strikes here to even questions about longer and beyond that. So, again, in addition to your reaction, we want to bring up to date on the very latest. And I want to bring in Andrew Whitman right now for what that role is. And we're talking about questions relating to Congress right now, global involvement, and if and when we have strikes, what, in fact, those strikes against Syria may look like.
Well, still far more questions than answers, Rich. And as of this hour, we don't know how the U.S. will respond to the Syrian chemical weapons attack last week. But two things are becoming clear. The U.S. will respond. We just don't know when. And U.S. officials agree with their intelligence counterparts in London that all signs indicate Syria did use chemical weapons against its own people. And today, the president said the world has an obligation to respond.
As he met with Baltic leaders at the White House today, new comments from President Obama as he nears a decision about a possible attack on Syria.
In no event are we considering any kind of military action that would involve boots on the ground, that would involve a long-term campaign.
The president met behind closed doors with his national security team as his administration worked to build public support for action in Syria, publicly releasing a 4-page intelligence bulletin. It says that the Syrian government carefully planned and executed a brutal chemical weapons attack last week that claimed the lives of more than 1,400 people, including more than 400 children.
Read for yourselves the verdict reached by our intelligence community about the chemical weapons attack the Assad regime inflicted on the opposition and on opposition-controlled or contested neighborhoods in the Damascus suburbs.
Secretary of State John Kerry says that the U.S. has information showing that Syrian soldiers prepared for the attack by putting on gas masks.
We know that these were specific instructions. We know where the rockets were launched from and at what time. We know where they landed and when.
Getting the support of the U.S. public could be difficult. One new poll says 50% of Americans oppose taking military action in Syria. But all indications suggest that President Obama could order a strike against Bashar al-Assad's regime.
And again, still no indication as to when an attack on Syria might come, but it could happen as early as tomorrow. UN inspectors remain in Syria tonight collecting evidence. They are scheduled to leave tomorrow, and once they're gone, a military strike could happen at any time. But there is reason to think that attacking sooner might be better, at least when it comes to what's happening inside Syria tonight. The National, an English-language newspaper based in Abu Dhabi, reporting on movements within Syria of people and resources and also of prisoners on the move. The prisoners, the paper reports, are being moved near likely U.S. target sites to act as human shields, while the other resources and people are being moved out of harm's way. And the longer it takes for a U.S. military strike, the longer those movements within Syria can continue, Rich.
And there's been many questions, as you said, about the timing, the ramp up to these attacks, and whether it's been too much of a telegraph. And then also the basic question we're going to get into tonight, is it worth it? And what's the point at this point if they're not going to be anything more than symbolic gestures? Although there are some accounts saying that there could be as many 50 to 60 targets that could be attacked. We've moved even more destroyers off of the coast here, obviously with Tomahawk missiles, more than 100 at least at latest count. So.
And also how we get into it. Do we need the world's cooperation? Do we need more debate within the United States? Does the president need to sell it to the American people?
It doesn't seem like the UN's going to give our blessing. That much we're sure of. How much? There won't be a vote probably in Congress. We don't know how the vote's going to turn out. So the president's making a call on this. It was interesting. Two former presidents today spoke out. Former President Bush, he said, President's got a tough decision here. He's got a good American military at his disposal. Assad is a bad guy. Jimmy Carter, however, he said no, that if you don't have the blessing of the UN in this fact, the U.S. would be breaking international law. It wouldn't be the wise move to make here. So you can't always pick the typical political enemies or supporters by party in this particular situation. You have isolationists in the Republican Party that have been critical. You have doves on the Democratic side have been critical as well. And there's so much fatigue in this country after Iraq and Afghanistan and open-ended wars and flawed intelligence like Iraq that got into these conflicts, that has a weariness on the public's part to say, again, could this be mission creep? Could it get bigger? We're going to talk about all those things with you at home. Now, as Andrew mentioned today, the president, he spoke. And from the White House, we gave you a little clip. But what we thought was we'd give you the broader context. I want you to hear what the president had to say from start to finish on the subject of Syria. And hear now the president just a few hours ago.
Today, we've released our unclassified assessment detailing with high confidence that the Syrian regime carried out a chemical weapons attack that killed well over 1,000 people, including hundreds of children. This follows the horrific images that shocked us all. This kind of attack is a challenge to the world. We cannot accept a world where women and children and innocent civilians are gassed on a terrible scale. This kind of attack threatens our national security interests by violating well-established international norms against the use of chemical weapons, by further threatening friends and allies of ours in the region like Israel and Turkey and Jordan, and it increases the risk that chemical weapons will be used in the future and fall into the hands of terrorists who might use them against us. So I have said before, and I meant what I said, that the world has an obligation to make sure that we maintain the norm against the use of chemical weapons. Now, I have not made a final decision about various actions that might be taken to help enforce that norm. But as I've already said, I have had my military and our team look at a wide range of options. We have consulted with allies, we've consulted with Congress, we've been in conversations with all the interested parties, and in no event are we considering any kind of military action that would involve boots on the ground, that would involve a long-term campaign, but we are looking at the possibility of a limited, narrow act that would help make sure that not only Syria but others around the world understand that the international community cares about maintaining this chemical weapons ban and norm. But again, I repeat, we're not considering any open-ended commitment. We're not considering any boots on the ground approach. What we will do is consider options that meet the narrow concern around chemical weapons, understanding that there's not going to be a solely military solution to the underlying conflict and tragedy that's taking place in Syria. And I will continue to consult closely with Congress. In addition to the release of the unclassified document, we are providing a classified briefing to congressional staffs today, and we'll offer that same classified briefing to members of Congress, as well as our international partners. And I will continue to provide updates to the American people as we get more information.
Now, that the president earlier today will also play a little bit later in the show some even stronger comments, you would argue, that came from Secretary of State John Kerry. Now, you notice he didn't talk about law because there's some vagaries as to whether or not the law is on the president's side, but make no mistake. His bluff's been called. The international community, most notably England, that we thought was with us. There was a parliament vote yesterday that was humiliating, not just for Cameron, but also for the United States here. We are largely on our own, but the world is watching. Horrific pictures of people killed in the hundreds, including in many numbers children here before our eyes, and all evidence points to the Assad regime. So the question is, what do we do about it? Public polls, and we'll show them to you after the break, say the public, more than not, saying, you know what, enough. Let's not get involved in yet another mess over in the Middle East. But the question is, can the president really do that? Can he just walk away after the bright line that he talked about and after 9 days of certainly the ramping up to this action? All right, we come back from the break. We're going to get your reaction. You know the toll-free number, everybody, and here's our question. 3-8-766-2428. Should we get involved in Syria tonight? We give you at home the chance to sound off. Your reaction straight ahead right after this.